Hi, everyone. My name is Rajni, and I am the Executive Director of Yoga Service Council. Today, as part of our Yoga and Resilience series, we are chatting it up and learning from Asha Frost, who is an Indigenous Medicine Woman, a spiritual mentor, and the founder of Sacred Membership. So, Asha, thank you so much for taking your time out to talk to me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Asha, we chatted briefly about this, and I want to kind of just get right into where you grew up, how you grew up, siblings, the environment, the sphere within which your childhood was.
Yeah, so I grew up north of Toronto in a town named Newmarket, where I'm still here. I'm on Anishinaabe land, Huron-Wendat land, and Haudenosaunee land. And I grew up here, but my home territory is called Neshinagamin, which is called Cape Croker, which is about 2.5, 3 hours from here. So when I speak about home, those are the lands my ancestors were on and still continue to live on. So home from a spiritual perspective and from a ancestral perspective feels like it's there, even though I grew up here. But and you know that's an interesting kind of story too, which I'll get into about growing up in Newmarket versus growing up on those ancestral lands. But I grew up here. I have one sister, and it was a really small town at the time. It was about 7,000 people. It's grown to about 80,000 now. So it was a lot of farmland, a lot of green space, a beautiful space to grow up, truly. And my childhood was I feel like it was really happy, and my sister and I are really close. So yeah, I think that growing up north of Toronto was a beautiful experience. I could say that.
Hmm. And was there a particular reason where that maybe your parents told you, or you just knew about why you were there in Newmarket?
Yes, well, I've only found that out recently. Actually, it's interesting. My father has shared with me. So he is from a First Nation that is different from my mother's First Nation. It's called Serpent River. And he shared with me that at the time when he was growing up, there was a lot of racism on his First Nation. And there's a lot of racism, there still is around for Indigenous people. But at the time, his family wanted to get away. They wanted to get away from all discrimination. So they moved to this small French town called Spanish Ontario. And that's where he grew up. But he had that learning of, I don't want to be here. Being here is a bad thing. Being Indigenous is it's not a good thing. It's not seen as a positive thing. So we want to get out of here. So I think that leaving those home territory energies was a survival mechanism, I think, in some part for him. So he just told me that story recently, and I thought, oh, that's interesting because, folks ask all the time, why aren't you on your First Nation? And why do people stay? Why do people leave? And I think it's very individual as to what's going on at the time. But I do like to share that story because it just shows how for some of us, we had to leave, or we made that decision to leave, or our ancestors did, for safety purposes and for healing purposes, and maybe for our generations to come. And I feel like my parents both had a vision for what they wanted to create for their generations, their 7 generations to come. And for some reason, their vision included, moving here. And I think for both of them, they broke a lot of cycles. That's part of their soul purpose. And I feel like I am a result of some of that. So I feel grateful about that.
Awesome. Cool. Brilliant. And so when you lived and were brought up in Newmarket, um, you said you had a very happy, time there, fields and farmland and spending time with your sister. Are there any specific memories that come from your childhood being in Newmarket that, either got you on the path or was maybe not even path, but that just kind of maybe started to have you think about something different related to nature and spirit and culture and all those things?
Well, that tended to come from my dream time moments. And that wasn't necessarily where I was from, but it was like in my own inner world, right? Spirit and my ancestors would visit me at night. And I didn't really understand who they were, what was happening. I didn't know that it didn't happen for everybody. I thought this was just sort of a normal thing. So I had a really active dream time and visionary time. So that began happening when I was really young, and it continued throughout my life. And yeah, being in New York, it was a beautiful place to be nurtured by that earth medicine for sure. but the memories I do have when you ask about childhood, they do bring me back to those ancestral lands and swimming in the waters of the Georgian Bay. The time we went to visit my grandparents, the land really speaks to me there. So it's very healing for me. So when you ask that question, that's instantly the memory that pops up into my mind. But my spiritual connection came from really broke open when I was a teenager because I got sick. So that was really what kind of allowed all the medicine to start to grow. And it just got me right on this path of healing myself first and foremost, and then letting that wisdom shine through.
Brilliant. And so I want to ask two questions. One question, is there a specific dream that you remember maybe that just kind of comes straight up into your mind? And the second question I want to ask, if you're comfortable talking about it, what happened when you got sick? Do you recall those moments when you were in that?
Yeah, the dreams. I mean, at night, the things that really stood out to me from a spirit perspective at night is I'd be sort of half in and out of consciousness, and the ancestors would come and I'd hear them drumming or they would be speaking to me. And actually, it would freak me out. I'd try to find my light really fast. I would sleepwalk a lot. I slept talk a lot. I would just, my nighttime was just very, very busy. So I wouldn't say it was the most restful, beautiful experience. It was like they were trying to tell me something, like, you know, you need to get on your path. We're calling you to a path, and like, you need to start listening. But I was young and I didn't really know what was going on. When I got sick, I was diagnosed with lupus. I was going through some heavy emotional things at the time, which I think activated it. But I needed to find a way to heal. And I think those whispers that my ancestors were giving me that whole time, they were leading me to that moment of like, come back to who you are, come back to your remembering. You know, you didn't grow up on the land, but the land's always in you because you are the earth. So come back to your knowing and how we healed, which was from plant medicines. I used homeopathy in a huge way. It changed my life. And I became a homeopath from that because I just could feel the energetic medicine being part of my healing path. So the earth has healed me, and my ancestors were calling me to that path quite early on, but I didn't listen till I got sick.
Which is, I don't want to say common, but yeah, I feel like when you get sick is when, you know, the shields or whatever we think we may have come down.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So let's talk a little bit more about your ancestry, your lineage. You know, let's talk about the beauty and everything that's there, the whole shebang. Like,
Yeah. So I'm Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, and as I said, my maternal line is from different First Nations actually across Canada. We just did it. My mom just gave me a map of sort of all the First Nations that all my grandparents and great grandparents were from. And it's kind of amazing to actually say they are actually from within 3 or 4 hours of where I'm living now. All of them were from that area. And I just visited my grandmother last week, and she was telling me some stories as well of like some of my relatives. So I have a lot of relatives, and there's about 6 First Nations that carry my relatives or those people that I'm connected to. And yeah, it's really beautiful to kind of see it on a map because it's all surrounded by Georgian Bay, which is a beautiful fresh water source here in Canada, and some of the Great Lakes as well. So water has always been a really important medicine for me. It feels like it's part of my lineage in a really deep way.
okay, beautiful. And when you say water is medicine, earth is medicine, for those who don't have this in their vocabulary, or for
Mm-hmm.
those that have just begun the exploration in this realm, how would you explain the medicine?
I believe medicine is something that helps us to reconnect. I know that sounds simple, but I think it's a catalyst to reconnection or remembering a part of ourselves that we may have forgotten or been split off from. So I think whether it's, I guess we usually use that term for like something like a drug or pharmaceutical that we're taking, which I think, I love earth medicine and plant medicine, but I think in a way, I guess that kind of medicine is helping our body to remember maybe something that it's needing. So it's the same thing. Our spirit might be needing something. So I'd say like a spirit animals, animal medicine, that we've forgotten an aspect of ourselves. So we bring that medicine to integrate it in again. Or the water medicine, you know, we're filled with water medicine and maybe we've forgotten how to purify that and how to keep a clean energy. So that can be a remembering for us. So I always love to think of it as this like catalyst to bring us whole, to bring us back to wholeness again.
Okay. Um, I'm sure a lot of people, if not most people, can resonate with that for sure. Um, so as you were growing up, you know, you're in the New Market area, there's explorations, you got sick, you know, you're growing and you're learning and you're connecting and you have this process going on. Are there other memories that pop up that when you were a child or a teenager, that you felt either jarred you in some way, connected you in some powerful way to something that was not you know, in this physical body, so to speak, anything like that, or any event or experience?
I'd say, I mean, this sounds kind of, you know, I'd say it's always trauma. It's always like traumatic things. And I would honestly say, I mean, 17 was probably the time when all of that started to crack open. You know, there was moments in my life that, you know, my parents separated, they got divorced. But it wasn't until I started really getting sick in my physical body that I could really, that trauma started happening. So I'd say every time I had like a really bad flare up of lupus or my physical body took a hit, they were pretty intensely traumatic times. And there were times I couldn't walk, I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't eat, I couldn't talk, I couldn't write or hold hands or anything like that. So there's lots of that kind of stuff that I think is like reminding me of how resilient I am, that I'm still here, and that I've learned so much through those times. You know, we speak about in our teachings like going to sweat lodge or going for fasting, and an elder said to me once, you've been through your sweat lodges and your fasts every time you get sick and every time you are in bed or you can't walk, or those things are because you just have to trust faith. You have to trust in your body. I've learned that my body can heal itself over and over again. So those are the moments that really stand out to me as big, I say, awakenings every
Mm,
time they happen.
yeah, thank you for sharing. And so you mentioned something, two things. One is around the age of 17, when these moments and these experiences, as you mentioned, kind of cracked you a bit.
Mhm.
And then you mentioned that your parents ended up getting divorced. So I want to hit on both of those a bit, and because you know, this series is all about the heart. It's about connecting to you with your story and your life. And so we'll pivot to when your parents were kind of going through their process of getting divorced. What happened with you, within you, outside of you, in your mind, in your heart? How did you work or cope with that whole process? And maybe even how your sister.
Yeah. At the time, I mean, that was when I was 13. So at the time, I think it's sort of hard to remember. You know, it's so interesting to think about those things because I think a part of me knew. So I was a very intuitive child and young adult, and I think a part of me knew that was going to happen, and a part of me chose that. I sort of feel like to go through that experience. So I don't remember being like devastated. I remember being sad, but not like devastated. And I think that probably at the time there was some like abandonment issues that were being formed, and things happening at the time. I think my sister took it a bit harder than I did. Maybe she was younger, but at the time there was a lot of things going on. And I'll share this story. I've shared this story publicly before. My dad, my first day of grade 9, my father won the lottery, and he has always said in his life, he grew up very, very poor, and he left home very early. They had 9 children, and he left, and he, you know, he'd always say, I'm going to win the lottery one day. And he always said that. So the positive thing I always take from that is like, he was a manifester, man. Like he visioned it, he felt it, he spoke it into being like every single day. And he won the lottery when I was in grade 9. But at the same time, my parents got separated around the same time. So I think having the capacity to hold that excitement, I don't even know what that meant at the time. I thought, oh my gosh, we have to move, or oh my gosh, like it didn't feel like a good thing to me somehow, because a part of me knew, I think, that things were going to change. So I think that was it. It was like now that I'm speaking about it, it's like when big things happen, I know that change is happening. And I think that perhaps that's hard for me because I think I do like things to be kind of the way they are, and feeling safe is really important for me. So big things like that come into my life feel a bit like chaos and like it's shaking things up. And it takes me a while to rebalance again because I just really like to yeah, have that feeling of wholeness within me. So that was a big time in my life. When we're talking about that, that was probably the biggest
Mm.
catalyst of things are shifting and changing.
And it sounds like you were very aware, like your perception. I mean, you were unfolded and folded into a broader perception to really get that.
I think so. I think I always had like a higher vision perspective. I carry a lot of like ego medicine is one of my protectors and main totems. And I think I always was able to kind of like get out of the little pieces and see the bigger picture, right? Even when it was really painful.
Mm,
I mean, maybe that's part of the resilience, right? When you're going through a lot of pain, you need to cope somehow, perhaps. So maybe it's part of the medicine and then part of the coping too, of just like, okay, what's the bigger vision here? What's the bigger lesson here? That's always been where I go.
yeah, love it. That's awesome. And then I want to pivot a bit to when you got sick, 17 years old. Do you have any particular theories or reasons as to why everything, I guess the cracking open, so to speak, with the when you got sick and that age group? Do you have any insight as to why it all happened kind of around at that moment?
Yeah. So there's two things. One of them is a medicine person. My sister was diagnosed with discoid lupus, which is of your skin, when she was younger. And the medicine person had told my mother that I had taken it on for her. Which is interesting, which is an interesting thing. Still think about that because I think that I did have the tendency to kind of soak up people's emotions and things like that, just not having very good boundaries or protection at the time. So that's one thing. But and also I was in a fairly stressful relationship for about 7 years from high school into my early adulthood. And I think that that was definitely the trigger. Like, I'm not sure what have happened. I can never think about what could have been or what would have happened, but I think that that amount of stress activated the illness in my body.
Helpful to know. Important to know. Um, so when you say that you took it on, with your sister, for your sister, or from your sister, help me understand a little bit more about what you mean by you took it on.
Hmm. That's a really good question. And I guess I can only speak from my own experience of as being a healer because I was in private practice for 17 years. And I remember seeing all these healers when I was learning and they were teaching me, and they said, your way of healing is to leap into somebody else's body to feel what they're feeling, and then you'll know what to do. You'll know what remedy to give them. You'll know what medicine to use. And I was just like, do I have to do it that way? But it was such a natural thing for me to do that. And not in a way where there wasn't permission or like that I was, that I was like trying to invade anybody's, like I would never do that. But when they were in my healing space and they were open to healing, that's tended to be the way that my medicine would work. So I think it's similar to that. I think that it's that kind of sensitivity piece and maybe part of the medicine of this is how I was going to heal. And maybe there was a part that was so worried about my sister because I was so young, like she was maybe in grade 8. I think that I was just so worried maybe that part of my healing tendency was, how can I help? How can I help so she doesn't have to feel the pain? It's not very productive, nor is it healthy, but I just think that that might have just been like a young version of myself that wanted to help. Maybe the healer coming out very early on.
Wow, that's thank you to share that. That hearing that story just to me personally makes me, I feel a little emotional about it because I can resonate with that. It's like, oh shit, like someone's going through, someone you love, and you just want to just, you know. When you were growing up and you were visiting your grandparents and traveling to the lands, to your lands, were there any stories, like stories that were told to you about your ancestors, and in those stories, was there something that struck you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. People talk about the medicine people, right? Because I think a lot of people have this sort of perception that indigenous people, you know, the medicine people just kind of hung out, they did ceremonies on the land, and like that's just not the way, especially now in the First Nations. You don't see random medicine people just walking around doing ceremony on the land, at least not the First Nations that I'm visiting. But I think that a lot of the stories went underground. So there's like stories of aunties and great grandparents that did medicine work, but that wasn't their, they didn't call themselves medicine people. It was like, my Nana has this story that she was born blind. This is my grandmother I just went to visit. She was born blind. And then a medicine person that was part of their family took her and put her in his bed, like was beside him and his wife, and just like she slept there for the first, I think, 3 weeks of her life. And then he healed her blindness with some plant medicine and just some spirit medicine. So there's stories like that, you know, are told to me, and then it's just told like this like everyday story, you know, well, I was blind when I was born, and then this happened, and then now I could see again. So I always want to ask more, but it's sort of just like that's it, story done, right? So there's stories like that, and then stories of like medicine people that had to take their medicines underground because my grandparents age, like that age group, they were in residential school. So that's where the medicines were taken away, the language was taken away, and that's not that long ago, right? And so I feel like my generation's here to reclaim those things, and it's not easy because so much has been taken, so much has been hidden, and to actually feel brave enough or courageous enough or worthy enough to say, I deserve to reclaim this when there's so much shame and everything's buried is a really difficult journey. So those stories that are told always bring me joy, and they kind of bring me sadness too.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you touch on something really important, especially when we're talking about, you know, we've talked about coping, we've talked about the desire to take someone's pain and bring it in, the inherent strength that just comes when you have a higher perception that you're able to see things even at a young age. It brings me to the point of, you know, why is there shame? Why does that feeling, and I can relate to this in a different way, but like, why is there shame for claiming, for connecting to something that's in your blood for so
Right.
long? What is your perception on that?
I think when, again, I can only speak to for myself because all of my ancestors are Indigenous, and all of them have a lot of, excuse me, all of them have a lot of trauma. It's coming from my throat. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Excuse me. Okay. So they all carry this residential school trauma. And I think about my grandfather. He didn't speak English when he went to school. He only spoke Ojibwe, but that was like beaten out of them, right? They weren't allowed to speak it. They weren't allowed to share their language in that way. So you think about a little child who's 5 going to school, not knowing how to communicate with anybody except to speak their language, and then they're not allowed. So I think my grandparents hold that shame so deeply. And I think that that's the intergenerational trauma that's passed through ourselves. That is the trauma of like, even like from a very visceral standpoint, I'm going to try to speak a word of my language. What if I get it wrong? What if I say it wrong? Like I will admit I have that. If I go into Instagram and if I share how I introduce myself in my language, I'm thinking, what if I pronounce that a little bit wrong? What if somebody calls me out and says, you did that wrong? Like there's so much, because that shame happened in our lifetime, right? So that's how it comes up. And I think because we carry those memories so deeply in our blood and our sacred waters, that it's very like, it feels like re-traumatization to kind of reclaim and think like, can I do this perfectly? That perfection piece comes up, like, how am I going to make my ancestors proud? How am I going to speak this in a way that is the right way? Because that's the colonized version of everything, right? And that the hard thing about that is there's a lot of lateral violence that happens in our communities of maybe somebody did grow up with that language, so they do know how to speak it. So then they might see someone doing it wrong, and then, you know, that starts to happen. And I think that makes me very sad. And then it does kind of shut you down a little bit. So that's my experience of that, at least. And I think it just takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to do it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Even if this all happened, I feel like my children need this. The next 7 generations need this. I can only show up as me. I can't be anybody else. This is how my ancestors are guiding me. This is how I need to move forward. But it can be a lonely path sometimes.
Yeah. The authenticity, the living from the heart is wow, so not easy.
Yeah.
So so let's so you were in a long-term relationship,
Yeah.
7 years ish. Um, you moved out of it,
Mhm.
and how did you meet your partner when the children came? How did all of this occur?
Oh gosh, we've been together for 20 years. And I met him shortly after that relationship actually. And I'd met him once when I was in that relationship. I went to university in a place called Guelph. And then I met him again 2 years later in Acapulco, actually, but he didn't remember me. And I said, I met you 2 years ago and you wanted to dance all night. And I remember you. And he's like, I've never met you in my life. And I just laughed. I was like, I remember him. I just remember his spirit. So, and his friends laugh because they say like, oh, he remembers everybody. So it was just interesting that it was like, the timing was off. Right. So we met in Acapulco and we just had sort of a fun week together. And then it was like kind of just like he's a very steady rock kind of personality. And he's always been my rock. And he came into my life at that time, I think, where I needed that. And we've really grown together because we met when we were 23. We're both self-employed. I think that has kind of kept us growing together because we both had to root for each other every single time. We were like, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it this month? Or, it was just been a lot of just trusting and boosting each other up to say, keep going.
Mm.
So that's really what our relationship is, a beautiful thing in that way. Everybody says, is he like you? Does he meditate? And I'm like, no, he's never been to any of my events, but he will always support me in all the other ways. And to me, that's what matters.
Yeah. So you have two kids, two boys?
Yeah, two boys.
Two boys. I can't remember how the eldest, 8, 9, 10,
He's 8.
something.
Yeah, that's good.
8,
Yeah,
that's right. He is 8 years old. So you have this loving relationship, this beautiful family, and you visit your lands, you take your boys with you, you have your relationship with your medicine, with the earth, with everything, your ancestral, your ancestry. How are the conversations with the kids about this?
Oh, well, I just feel like I just speak about these things all the time. And I just hope that it sort of translates to them in some way. My eldest, we just went away, as I shared, and he wanted a medicine bag. So like a medicine bag to wear on his heart. So we found the right one and I said, just pick it up. And I said, like, ask it if it's yours and ask what medicine it carries, So just teaching him to trust himself, because the way that I tend to teach is that we do have this medicine inside of us and we need that spaciousness to find it and to listen, because I think our culture tells us to like, all the answers are outside of us. So I really try to foster like this inner trust with him and this inner wisdom. And I hear him say things like, the ancestors are in the stars, or we're going to put our tobacco down today in gratitude, or mommy, can we sing the water song today? Like, I think that they just kind of, it's by osmosis. My little one's just turned 3, so he just kind of goes along and giggles. But I think like they start, we pull animal spirit cards and I talk to them at night, like about what are we grateful for? And if somebody's sick, what animal medicine might they need? So we just practice. Yeah, but it's very organic. Like I don't ever want like them to feel like, oh, that's mom again, talking about the songs or whatever that is. But they seem to, they're surrounded by it. My office is in my home since it's not there anymore, but I've had like crystals and medicines everywhere. So I think they just think that this is a normal part of their daily life.
I love that. I love it. You just grow up in it and you're like, this is normal. And I
Yeah.
love it. Yes, because it is. It should be, of course. And so when you were, pregnant with each of your boys, how was that experience for you? And how did the medicine play a role in that motherhood process, that becoming?
Yeah. With my first son, I loved being pregnant. I would do it again and again. I loved being pregnant. I felt so full of creation energy. Like it was just so sacred to me. I loved it. And I really felt his spirit being like, I felt like he was going to be a healer. And I say this to him because I was really busy at the time. I remember I was trying to like see as many people so I could take a bit of leave. And I think I did like 440 healings during the time that I was in my belly. And I said, like, or my womb. And I said, you helped me. You helped me do those 440 healings. Like, I had my hands on people and he was inside of me. And I think about that often, and how that must have like marinated within his soul somehow, or how he must have really helped to guide those healings. And it was kind of like a apprenticeship, I guess, inside of me while he was doing that. That birth was really traumatic. I ended up breaking my pelvis, giving birth to him. And I think I've realized now I was breaking a lot of ancestral trauma and pain through that birth experience for him, and then for my next son, because my next son has just a very different personality. So I just think that we broke it together. So it was like a co-creation of ancestral healing that perhaps his soul chose. And I wish we didn't have to go through that, but we did. We did. And my second son came in as a bit of a surprise because we thought we were done. He zoomed in like this little ball of sunshine. And my birth was so easy. I was so nervous again because I was just terrified. Like, even though I've trusted my body to heal, that experience was so painful that I was like, I can't go through that again. I just can't go through that again. So even right up to the last minute before I pushed him out, I remember looking at the nurse terrified, like, I just can't do that again, you know? And then he popped out and I was like, something healed, right? But I didn't know until the last moment. Like, we talk about faith and trust, and I feel like I'm a fairly trusting person, but sometimes those things get the better of me, and I wasn't in that space. But then when he came, I thought, oh, something healed. So I got the confirmation then.
Beautiful. When you were giving birth to your first son and your pelvis broke, and you mentioned that, there was, can we explore that a little bit more, to as much as you're comfortable? When, like, what did you later on, how did you understand that and feel what just happened and what it was doing?
Yeah, it took me a lot, honestly. So he just turned 8. I'd say this year I finally kind of got it, because I think I was stuck in that trauma for a long time. I couldn't walk for at least probably 6 weeks, and I still can feel like instability in my hips just from that experience. So I think, I don't know what blasted away, but if I kind of like tune back into that moment before it happened, I was pushing really, really hard. And I think that is something that I've had to work on from a soul level, is like pushing, like this inner drive to like do more, do better, be perfect. All of those things I think sort of come from some of that residential school trauma too. Like, I always see like a nun or a priest when I think about that. So I think that it was breaking some of that colonial, like, do more, push harder, keep working, like all of that energy kind of broke apart. But it's been unfolding. Like, we think about the layers, right? Like the onion peeling away. And I always say to the folks that I serve, like, we think something's healed and then there's another layer to drop into, and it's okay, because it's just like, that's the next part of your evolution, and there's more truth and wisdom. And through the pain is the miracle, right? There's miracles. So I think I still probably haven't processed all of it yet, but I do feel like if I think back to that moment, I can almost see a vision of like a spark, like something broke. Well, something did break. So if I ask my physical body, why did my pelvis break? That's what I hear my ancestors say.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to understand that a little bit more. So I feel like this would, touch a lot of people here, a lot of mothers as well. Well, thank you. And okay, so, we've gone through, and this is barely the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure, of your life, barely. And, when I, in the beginning, we introduced you as the Indigenous Medicine Woman. So that, I suppose, identity, although I'm not sure if you would use that word, what was the culmination? How did that happen?
That's a really good question. I think it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of listening because, a lot of searching, right? We're always looking for that person to tap us on the head and say, you've made it. Here you are. Here's your title, right? And I think, I've studied with many like medicine people, primarily for my own healing. I'll say that, I'm not a like, teach me. I'm more like a, how can I heal myself? How can I take this wisdom into my own being and body and let it let it unfold just naturally, like the way that it's meant to, right? So I think that that's how I've learned a lot of things. And that person, I think I searched for a long time for somebody to be like, here you go, this is your path, you are on the right path. And even after seeing thousands and thousands of people in private practice, like, I just learned so much from them. I learned so much from my mistakes and my growth. And I had to just claim it for myself one day. I was just like, I had a lot of healers and medicine people say, like, you have this incredible medicine, like you're a chosen one. But I think ultimately we have to claim it for ourselves. Because no matter what, even if somebody says it for us and we don't believe it, then, we're not left with with that rootedness.
Yeah, claim it for yourself. I think that's such a critical term. It's a critical phrase that I'm sure people come to it in different ways, but I don't think we say it that often.
No.
So thank you for
True.
sharing.
And my favorite thing to do for people, like if I really think about my medicine, folks have sat in front of me, and I have seen thousands and thousands just sit on my couch in front of me. And the first thing I would see their inherent divine medicine. I wouldn't see their wounds. I mean, I would hold space for them and I'd hear them and I could see them, but it was like I could just see their medicine self, and I could hold space for their highest healed vision. And I thought, that's why I'm here. To, not in like a bypassy way, just in like a truth, like I believe we come from the stars. We're birthed. Creator has a vision for us, wherever you want to call Creator, has a vision for us before we get here. And our soul's just meant to spark here. And yes, it can be painful and dense and really friggin' hard. But like ultimately, if we can come back to that medicine truth within ourselves every day, even a little bit, then I think it keeps us here.
Thank you. I could talk to you forever. So I want to touch on your sacred membership. That is your creation. Let's chat a little bit about that. When did you come to that point of sacred member, like that name or that, that identity for what it is that you're bringing out into the world? When did you come to that? What was that process like? And then what is within that circle?
So I had a free Facebook group called Sacred Medicine Circle. And I always loved the word sacred, the essence of that, just holding things, I guess, with intention, or however you want to hold it, and just seeing the sacred in everything as much as we can, right? I just always loved that. So when I actually thought, what am I going to name my membership? I just really loved that name. I just thought sacred, it just kind of represented how I live my life the best way I can every day, I guess. And so when I birthed it, I just had my baby, my second child, and I was stepping away from my private practice. And I thought, I loved holding circles. Like I did so many circles over my years of practice, and it was my favorite thing to hold space in that way. And I loved my free Facebook group, but I thought, okay, I'm ready to translate this into like a paid offering. How can I do this? So it's like community was born. And, it's always evolving and shifting, but it's really me showing up and holding space for healing. And originally it was going to be like lots of teachings, lots of information. And what I've realized is that there's a lot of that in the world. There's a ton of information. There's tons of places you can even Google, but there's not a lot of space for integration. So it may not be like, everybody's like, oh, I want to learn. And like, there's learning in there definitely. But again, it's always self-learning. Like, how can what I'm offering you unfold the truth within you? How can I help you root down to that claiming? And how can the medicine touch you so that you can activate your own? So that is the essence of sacred. And it's a lot of, we talk about the cycles and the medicine wheel and how we all go through like the expansion, the contraction, the resting, those cycles are really important in there, because I think we're always, I don't know, our culture tells us you need to be on all the time. So this is a place where you can honor your restful times and just be. And I think even more now, more than ever, we need that after all of the stuff that's up in the world and all of the information we've taken in. I notice a lot of folks are living from here and we haven't integrated it into our feet yet. So I think that part's really important. And that's what I hope, that's my intention for Sacred, the integration.
That's you just said smack dab of really powerful things as it relates to the outside world. And I did want to touch on that for these last few moments here of our chat, where, exactly what you said, that people are here, the integration, bringing it down into the feet doesn't seem to have occurred yet with what's happening in the world, the uprisings that are happening, these rationalizations that are being made, populations having to come to terms with things and choosing not to come to terms with things. So when you say that integration, bringing it down to the feet, what does that mean and look like in your vision?
So I guess this is this is how I experienced it. You know, when the uprising kind of happened, it was like Instagram was just like post, 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 and it was just like dit, 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 and it was like all of this, I think, overstimulation of our nervous system. Like, how much can one person actually take in? Like, I don't think we have the capacity to take in as much of that as we have been exposed to, especially because we were not resourced because we were in COVID, right? So we were all just like, and then we have all of this coming at us. And I think that that can put us into like a freeze or like a sort of like, what do I do? And we almost then, it's like, how do I bring this into action? So I think then it's like, it sort of comes down to like the listening. So just thinking back into like, okay, so I can take this and I can just listen. Now, how does this feel to my heart? How does this feel to my truth? What's being shaken up? And we need to do some healing around that to say like, am I defensive? Am I feeling shame? Like, we sort of need to process through those things. And I think that that's maybe where people are getting stuck. And then we just separate ourselves from it all because I'm like, I can't feel the shame. It's too much. I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to blame somebody, or I'm going to, shut myself down again. So I think that's the healing part happens here, I think, in the heart. And then we bring it down to like our gut where it's like, what do I know to be true now? What is true for me? Because like we can only walk with that, right? What is true for me through the healing that I've done? And then, okay, how am I going to use that truth in action now? What am I going to do? Am I going to uplift voices? Am I going to donate money? Am I going to march? Because I think everybody's action step is very different. And I think for a while there, everybody got a little bit frozen and I have to do it all. And we can't do it all. So that integration is so important because if we don't have that, then we do get really just like stuck. But it's like, let's choose what works for me. Let's bring the power in myself and think, okay, I can make a difference by speaking or sharing or donating or marching, or all those things add up. And I just, yeah, that's what I saw, at least from my perspective in my communities, and then also like watching what's happening on social media.
Wow, thank you. I always like to talk about that because I think what I'm finding is that everybody that I'm talking to, and maybe it's because my own practices are so introspective and very meditative, and it's very, I'm always going in and down, where there's a theme that's coming across from those that have been through rounds and have been through their own life histories in which there was a lot to work with. There's this thread of slow down, process, introspect. Um, so it's funny how you don't see that on social media necessarily all the time.
Never really.
Yeah.
Never really. I think that is the piece that's missing. Like, we can talk about it, but then are we doing it? Like, are we actually taking a break for like, I mean, I just took a break. I haven't posted there in a couple of weeks. And I do have to say, I've been like, is it okay? Like, but I just like, it's just, I have to stay in my integrity with that, because if I don't, then I mean, I'm always like, am I letting anybody down? Or, those ego things come up, and I'm like, but the only person that matters is me, that I'm not letting myself down, that I'm not abandoning myself. Because if I do that, then what am I left with? So I love that you shared that, because I think it's important to just, I don't know, it's hard to not get caught up. But I think that for us to move forward, we need that rest, we need that integration time, and that introspection. It's so vital.
Mm. And you said another word that was really important: integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Integrity and holding yourself to that, for yourself, for your heart. That's a really big deal that I think sometimes people have a hard time with. It's easy to be loud sometimes. It's easier to be outraged all the time about things. And sometimes that's okay because that's someone's process too.
And
And I think it's helpful to have reminders when you're talking to people that perhaps we explore something else for just a little bit of time. Perhaps we maybe bring it in for a little bit of time and see what happens.
yeah, we never know. I guess that's the great mystery of the quiet. We never know. But then if we don't do that, we can't experience that magic in the background that that really starts to stir up in the quiet. And
Mm.
I never want to miss those moments because
Mm.
I know I've experienced them so many times, and that's where my magic moments have happened.
Yeah. And so, Asha, when you talk about what we, so we've learned so much about you, which is like 0.25% of probably of your entire life. So when we, when we talk about how strength and resiliency is inherently built, like it's kind of easy to see how the medicine, how your experiences, how you chosen to associate with your lineage and kind of really breathe into it has lent to your resiliency and how you are. So is there anything else you want to add into that framework?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess like the biggest thing is no matter what your lineage is, no matter what your ancestry is, I think that we all have those resilient ancestors. I think that we can tap into it. Like people are always asking me, how do I do that? Do I have to find the exact people? But I think we can do it through meditation and quiet. I think we can pray at night and say, my resilient ancestors, the ones that were the warriors, or whoever you want to like come through my bones and my blood, give me the memories through my dreams, like talk to my spirit. And I think that if we practice that enough, you'll start to feel the integration of that. And everybody has access to that.
Mm. It's funny in the evenings before I go to sleep, I always say this to myself, and I always say, and sometimes I change the words around, but I always say I call in the love and the
Mm,
support and the protection of my ancestors. It's like automatic. As soon as my head hits the ground, I'm just like, and I breathe it in, I feel it in, and I take it in.
I love
And it's
that.
like I can almost every single night, I can feel surrounded by their energy, and it's fascinating, and it's such a brilliant, beautiful connection to feel them around you. And it's like I can be in the kitchen and I can say that, and it's like bam, instantly they're here. So it's just been such a, like I get emotional about it because there's just such a unyielding, unconditional love that I can feel every time I say that. Bam, they're there.
Yes.
It's,
Yes, that's a powerful connection. And again, I believe everybody can do that. It's just practice and developing it.
yeah, 100%. Um, wow. Thank you, Asha.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate this. And you have a book coming out?
I do, not till 2022, but it's called You Are the Medicine, and it will be published by Hay House. So I'm excited.
Love it. Love it. You are the medicine coming at our population and the whole world. 2022 from Hay House. And in the meantime, people can find you at Sacred Membership and obviously on Instagram. And we'll have all your information underneath this YouTube video where people can, and I am sure people are going to be like, where do I find Asha with this interview? Like, I can feel it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Asha. I appreciate it. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. And you can connect with Asha in a myriad of ways, which will all be underneath this video. So thank you very much. And thank you, Asha, so much.
Thank you.